Hello, everyone. I'm meteorologist Sean Sublette, and welcome to Across the Sky, our national Lee Enterprises weather podcast. Lee Enterprises has print and digital news operations in more than 70 locations across the country, including my home base in Richmond, Virginia. I'm joined by my meteorology colleagues from across the sky, Matt Holiner in Chicago and Kirsten Lang in Tulsa. Our pal Joe Martucci away from the office today, July 25th. And we bring that up. We often don't talk about the specific day, but we bring that up because our guest this week is Jorge Torres, a meteorologist at the ABC station in Phoenix, Arizona. They have had more than 2 consecutive weeks with temperatures of 110 degrees or hotter. And we want to talk about how the city has been handling it, how the people have been handling it. And, Matt, Kirsten, some of the things he talked about are things that we normally never have to think about here in the central United States or the eastern United States. And some was very eye-opening.
Yeah, you listen for when he starts to talk about what part of the hospital is actually seeing capacity during this time, because I think that was something that really was surprising to me.
Yeah, and we've got into the discussion because, I've seen some people kind of dismiss the heat in Arizona and the Southwest, like, oh, it's just a dry heat. And Jorge's from Texas. I'm from Texas. So I was like, I want to talk to a guy who's experienced both the heat and humidity and the dry heat and really get an idea of which is worse. Are they just the same? So diving in and hearing his description and comparing Texas and Arizona, I really enjoyed that.
Oh, yes. We hear that all the time. Oh, but it's a dry heat. So he'll get into that. I'll talk about power grid. I'll talk about water supply, infrastructure, all that stuff coming up. Jorge is a native of Texas, as you alluded to. He's a graduate at Texas A&M. Before he was in Phoenix, he worked on the air in El Paso and Albuquerque. So let's get right to our conversation with Jorge Torres, meteorologist at ABC 15 in Phoenix, Arizona. Jorge, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this brutal heat you've had in Arizona and in Phoenix in particular. First off, I want to talk about Phoenix. For people who aren't from around Phoenix in Arizona and the Southwest, they had this idea, well, of course it's hot, it's Phoenix. But talk a little bit about how it is different this year, both in scope and how long this heat wave has been going on.
Yeah, Sean. So a lot of people outside of Phoenix, the Valley in Arizona, think of Phoenix as a brutally hot place, which for most of the summer, it is. The difference this year is the longevity of this excessive heat wave. Now, we actually have to start with the beginning of the year when it was a cooler and wetter start across the West, including here in Arizona. We didn't really start seeing the 110s until late June, and we usually get them in mid-June. In fact, June tends to be on average the hottest month of the year in Phoenix, but July of 2023 is going to beat that by a landslide. We have had now 25 consecutive days with highs at or above 110 degrees. That blows the all-time record of 18 days that was set back in June of 1974. That's just one aspect. The other aspect is just how warm it stays even at night. That's the other thing we're noticing. A lot more nights where lows don't even get below 90 degrees. We are now on 15 straight days with lows at or above 90. So the city and much of the valley doesn't even cool down at night. So that's what's made this particular stretch not just extreme, but also dangerous and unfortunately even deadly.
So, Jorge, you mentioned that it's been dangerous and it's been deadly. Working in the news business, I'm sure you've heard a lot of stories. How are you seeing people cope with the heat in different ways than maybe they wouldn't have in the past, just with this unrelenting heat wave that you've had?
So one of the things here at ABC 15 that we promote is obviously people trying to stay inside for as long as they possibly can safely between the hours of, usually we would say from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., but it's already around 100 degrees by 9 a.m. here. So we're telling people to stay inside from essentially 9 o'clock until 6 if they can. Obviously, not a lot of people can because you have to be outside. Their job makes them be outside. So another thing we always say, obviously, is stay hydrated, drink plenty of water, electrolyte drinks. But we're also encouraging people to go to their nearest cooling center. So one thing that the city of Phoenix and Maricopa County has done very well is provide cooling centers for people to find an adequate location, not only to stay cool if they can for a long period of time, but also to get water. And that's one thing we're seeing a lot here is a lot of cooperation between government agencies and entities to keep people who don't really have the luxury or the necessity or to find a shelter, to find a cooler space. And it gives them that opportunity, along with obviously malls being open, movie theaters, large places where people can go in and stay cool.
And Jorge, I'm curious about how disruptive this has been on everyday life there. Have there been certain adjustments to workers who have to be outside, adjustments in their hours, or maybe more frequent breaks or more water provided? And have there been any outdoor activities? I mean, we're talking about summertime here when people want to be going out and doing stuff. Have there been any events that have been canceled because of the heat?
There was one just recently. There was a concert by the group Disturbed that was canceled as a result of the heat because it was in an outdoor amphitheater. And in July, temperatures begin to cool down a bit usually, so it's okay for the most part. But obviously this July has been unprecedented when it comes to this relentless heat. So that is one event that was canceled as a result of the excessive heat. We've had a lot of other events where people have raised their concerns or voiced their concerns regarding temperatures with a few concerts, but they've still gone off. As far as other events, now we're starting to see more schools open back up because a lot of schools here in the Valley, which will be referred to the Phoenix metro area, are year-round. So they're beginning to open up. They're still having practices, but yes, they're giving their players more breaks for water, obviously, along with many crews who work outside. We're talking construction workers. We're talking landscapers. They're still out in it, starting very early. A lot of these crews start before sunrise, when it's obviously still hot, still temperatures in the 90s. But they, from what we're understanding, are getting the breaks in order to stay cool and still do the job that they've been tasked to do.
Yeah, with the stuff that has to be done outside, I get that entirely. But I also think in this kind of heat, are there things happening to infrastructure? I've heard, you hear the horror stories about pavement starting to melt. When it gets a certain temperature threshold, it takes a lot longer or a lot more running room for aircraft to get going because the air density isn't sufficient to give lift on the wings. Any of that kind of stuff starting to happen from what you've seen?
Nothing that's widespread, at least from what we've been reporting. Now, we have heard of a lot more air conditioning units go out because they're on for such a long time. So we're seeing a lot more these air conditioning companies, the HVACs, going to repair a lot of these residential areas that don't have AC working. And in a place like Phoenix in the middle of summer, that can be dangerous and that can be deadly. So we are seeing that. Something else we're noticing, not so much from the infrastructure standpoint, but from the public health standpoint, a lot more burn victims going to the Arizona Burn Center as a result of falling on the pavement. So we're hearing reports of first degree, second degree, even third degree burns from just being on the pavement, not just falling on it, but for those who unfortunately don't have a home to go to, are sleeping on it at night and throughout the day. So some of the beds at the Arizona Burn Center are at good capacity, a lot of them due to, unfortunately, some of the burn victims as a result of just how hot the pavement and the asphalt can be in excess of 150, even 160 degrees. So that's something we're noticing a lot too.
All right. So as you mentioned before, as we get into July, that's normally when the temperatures tend to back off. And I'm assuming that's because it's about the time of year when the monsoon circulation is expected to show up. Talk a little bit about that in terms of the Phoenix climate, when you oftentimes expect the worst, the heat to break in the latter part of the summer. Talk about the monsoon circulation, why it's important, and I'm imagining people are really itching for it to show up soon.
Everyone here in Arizona is waiting for the monsoon to ramp up. And yes, for those of you who are watching outside of Arizona in the Southwest, a part of the United States does have its own version of the monsoon. It's not as intense as the one you're used to hearing about, say, in India, but we do have our monsoon season. We have our seasonal wind shift that starts to occur mainly in July, specifically for Arizona, but the onset starts in June in northern Mexico. What happens is that once you start to get those temperatures in the Southwest really beginning to heat up, which is around June, we start to see that wind shift from the south and we get more moisture coming in. And then by July, mid-July is when we really begin to see that monsoon flow really park itself over Arizona and the Southwest. And that's when we start to see those thunderstorms in the afternoon, producing some of those famous videos you've seen of walls of dust called haboobs. In fact, we had one about a week ago. And then we start to see more storms develop, and that's when we get a lot of our rainfall. That being said, because most of the early summer months were cooler than average, the monsoon was delayed. So that's why July has been one of the hottest months on record and may actually be the hottest month on record for Phoenix, because we really haven't had the monsoon moisture and the storms to go with it to really drop those temperatures. And we're still waiting, but there are signs here in the next week or two that finally we could start to see some signs of life with the monsoon statewide.
Yeah, that was something that I was looking at prior to talking with you, is that long-term forecasting, kind of, when relief was in sight. And there was a lot of promise. Yeah, of course it can't last forever. But, looking at that, what is it looking like? Does it look like August is going to be a little bit better month for you guys there then?
Yes, as of now, it does appear that August looks a little more promising as far as if not a wetter than average trend, at least a near normal, which we will take, obviously, starting off with July being bone dry. And actually, when it comes to rainfall, we have already exceeded 120 days without measurable precipitation at Phoenix Sky Harbor, which is where the official observations are taken. And that's already about to approach the top 5 list as far as longest stretches without rainfall. So you add on the 110-degree days we've had, the 90-degree days we've had, and no rain over a span of months. So everyone's already like, we're tired of this. We want some relief. And it does appear that August is looking, if not where we should be in a given month for August during the monsoon, maybe above average.
Yeah, I'm imagining where you should be for this time of year will be a welcome relief. We're going to take a quick break, then we'll have more with Jorge Torres from ABC 15 in Phoenix, Arizona, and the blistering heat wave they're going through on Across the Sky. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Across the Sky podcast. I'm meteorologist Sean Sublette, along with Kirsten Lang and Matt Holiner. And our guest this week is Jorge Torres from ABC 15 in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, where they are in the midst of an absolutely brutal and record-shattering heat wave. Now, Jorge, I know it's 25 days above 110 and counting. This heat wave so bad, so prolonged. What is kind of the feeling on the street, as it were, in terms of how people are perceiving this? Do they kind of see this as like, you know what, maybe this climate change thing is starting to show up? Are they kind of seeing it as, well, it's just Arizona and we're used to it? What's kind of the feeling out there in the public as you kind of mingle around and hear people talking about this heat wave?
Well, I'm getting different reactions from different people. You have those who are lifers here in Arizona, specifically here in the Phoenix metro, and they're like, it's Phoenix in summer. It's going to be hot. It's going to be 110 degrees every now and then. The issue is that it's so prolonged, and we keep breaking these records essentially daily, not just during the afternoon, where it's 110, 115. Our hottest temperature so far this year, 119. It's happened twice already, and that hasn't happened since about 2017. So a lot of these temperatures haven't happened in a very long time. And so you have those who are like, you know what, this in 2020, we thought that was bad, where we had 53 days that entire year with highs at and above 110. That's still a record. But you're seeing this happening more frequently, especially since the early 2000s. So people are also taking notice, like, I don't remember being like this for so long. And then the other group that some people tend to forget about are those that just moved here. The one thing about Phoenix is it's a vastly growing community, and we have people moving in from the Midwest, from California, from all parts of the country and the world. And for them, this is their first summer in Arizona, and they're experiencing one of the worst on record. So for them, it's like, is it normally like this? And we're like, it's not normally like this, but it may be a new normal if we continue going the path we are worldwide.
And Jorge, I want to talk about the kind of heat. So you're from Texas, I'm from Texas as well, and so we are used to the heat. And then one of the arguments that comes up for people in Texas and the Southeast is like, well, we deal with the humidity. It's the heat and humidity. Out west in Phoenix and Arizona, it's a dry heat, so no big deal. So Is that true? Is a dry heat really better? Does the humidity make a difference, or is hot just hot?
It's hot. It's hot everywhere. When it's 100 degrees with no humidity, obviously that feels way better than 100 degrees with so much humidity like in Texas, which I don't miss growing up there, and the summers were just brutal. But when you get to 110, when you get to 115, even when there's little humidity, it hurts. Like, you feel it. It's a dry heat, but so is an oven. So is a jet engine. You don't want that in your face all day long. As much as I don't miss that humidity in Texas, 100 degrees or 95 degrees with humidity, I'll take that over 115, 117, 118 degrees, even close to 119. It's a different kind of heat, and it's a heat that no one wants to be in, but you have millions of people that are in it every day, myself included.
And just to follow up on that too, I'm curious about the wind situation in Phoenix, because one thing that was, I noticed a difference when I grew up in San Antonio from my 3 years living in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, which is near the Texas coast. And the valley compared to San Antonio, there was a lot more wind. We got a lot more sea breeze activity. So we had a lot of hot, humid days, but there were quite a few days where it was breezy. And that did make a difference. When there was a breeze and you could at least blow the sweat off your body, it seemed to make a difference. So wind can help too. So what is the wind situation like in Phoenix, especially during this heat wave?
Well, during the summer, it doesn't really get super windy unless you have storms nearby. We've had a couple here and there. But in the afternoons, we do get some occasional breezes, wind speeds around 10 to 15. But when you have 10 to 15 mile an hour wind speeds from a dry place with temperatures at 110, 115 degrees, it feels like a furnace that's blowing in your face. So it doesn't give you that cool feeling like you would on the Texas coast. Here, it's just like a furnace is on and it's blowing hot air in your face. So it's really not comfortable, even when we do have breezy days.
And something else I was just curious about, Jorge, how are things going, I guess, with the electric grid there? Are you guys seeing any sort of power outages due to the heat?
We are seeing power outages here and there across the valley, but they're not really prolonged. It is not a major outage issue across the valley, and we don't expect it to be. The grid here is different than because the one people know about in Texas with ERCOT, where they've had their issues and their concerns regarding demand over the past few years. We don't really have that concern here, but we do have those occasional power outages in certain communities, and they can go on for a couple of hours, which is concerning. But the local energy and utility groups here, APS or SRP, they are on top of it for the most part when it comes to getting the power back on for those communities that are dealing with the outage, whether it be short-term or long-term.
One other question I had kind of dovetails off of that. Going back to water supply, I mean, I know it was a little bit wetter at the beginning of the year. Water supply, okay. We hear a lot of the horror stories here in the Eastern United States about the West is in deep trouble, running out of water. It was a wet winter, so I'm guessing that's helped everybody out a fair bit, at least for a summer or two. But how is the water situation this summer there in Arizona?
You're right in that the winter, it was a wet one across the West from California to Colorado, where a lot of Arizona's water supply comes from the Colorado River. And the lake levels at Powell and Meade have gone up quite a bit over the past few months. So that is a welcome sight for us here in Arizona, where a lot of our water supply comes from the Colorado and also the Salt and Verde rivers, which are more local, and they haven't really been impacted as much, thankfully. The other concern, obviously, is our groundwater supply, and that's where we've had more concern because the majority of groundwater in the state of Arizona is unregulated. You have a few places, including Phoenix, that has a regulated groundwater supply. In fact, earlier this year, the governor of Arizona, Katie Hobbs, announced that within the Phoenix AMA, or active management area, companies who are only going to use groundwater as far as the water supply for certain communities within the Phoenix metro area have to show proof of another form of water. And it can't just be solely groundwater. If not, and if they're building a large enough community, residential or subdivision, then they cannot be approved to build. So that is something that is brand new as of this year. Some companies will not be allowed to build if they are only showing groundwater as their only source of water for the project that they are building. So that's something that's new that our governor has imposed here.
Yeah, and I'm curious about what other long-term discussions are happening since over the last few years we've seen these extended heat waves. This seems to be something that is going to be an issue moving forward. The heat situation getting worse, perhaps extended droughts. What are some of the other discussions that are going on as far as long-term planning, preparing Phoenix? Because you're obviously not going to move the entire city of Phoenix out of there. The population has just been going up. So what kind of long-term discussions are happening about what can be done moving forward in the future to be better prepared for these heat waves?
Well, one thing when it comes to the heat waves, the city of Phoenix is the first city in the country that has its own Office of Heat and Mitigation. It was put into place a couple of years ago, and it's looking at ways to mitigate the extreme heat that we deal with here in Phoenix, one of the hottest metropolitan cities in the country. And so the office is coming up ways to try to be resilient when it comes to allowing the valley to cool down a bit by making more parks with trees, things of that nature. So that is something that the city is really, really putting an emphasis on, because the Phoenix is growing and it's going to grow quite a bit. People, for the most part, love Phoenix and Arizona when it's not 110, 115 degrees. You have the rest of the year where temperatures are very comfortable, and so are our weather conditions. But in the summer months, obviously, it can get dangerously hot, like this summer so far. So that's one thing that, looking long term, the city is working on to find ways to make the city a bit cooler than it has been.
Yeah, I understand that for sure, because I think we all know the planets and the cities are only getting hotter. We've got urban heat to contend with on top of the planetary warming signal. So it's good that they're thinking ahead for the long-term planning. Jorge, anything else you wanted to share before we turn you loose and let you get back to your day job?
I mean, one thing we're constantly doing here at ABC 15 is talking about these issues, whether it be extreme heat, whether it be air quality, whether it be, as you guys talked about, or asked about the water concerns here in Arizona and across the West. And we're continuing to tell the public that, this is something that we're going to have to deal with unless changes are made, not just at the local level at your home, but also at the government level, higher up from state and federal. And, the more we report on it, the more people are understanding the issues, and the more we could see some change. I mean, it's not stuff that we're asking for. We're just saying, if this doesn't happen, that's going to happen. But if this happens, that'll happen. So that's all we're doing here at ABC 15, is just talking about the important issues when it comes to climate, specifically that pertains to Phoenix and Arizona, and let the viewers know what's happening.
Good man. Good man. So Jorge, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. And do your best to stay cool. Tell all of your colleagues there at ABC 15 to stay cool as well. And hopefully we'll talk with you again soon.
All right, looking forward to it. Hopefully by then temperatures here will be much, much cooler.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if we can get a good haboob going for later this summer into the fall. Take care, man.
All right, y'all take care. Thank you.
What a great conversation with Jorge today in the midst of a heat wave that frankly is very hard for me to even imagine. And one of the things I'm glad y'all brought up was the power situation, because it's really hard to imagine going without electricity and air conditioning in a situation like this. I remember as a kid, in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have air conditioning in the hot Virginia summers. And that was bad enough. I really can't fathom what it would be like to be in a house without air conditioning in Phoenix, Arizona right about now.
Well, and it just got me thinking about, beyond, the Southeast and Southwest where, most folks at least have air conditioning. Now, there is the issue where the cost is so high that people are not running their air conditioners in this extreme heat, which is a scary thought. But to me, we're seeing the heat expand to more places farther north. And these heat waves aren't just limited to the Southwest, but they're happening in the Midwest, the Northwest, the Northeast, and places where some people don't even have air conditioning. Again, that was the biggest shock to me moving from Texas to Chicago, how there are apartments here, there are homes here that don't even have air conditioning. And I think moving forward, you're going to see less and less in that, and a pivot where, so much of the focus has been on the heat for the cold winters and making sure people have heat, to a more of a shift that in the summer, We got to make sure people have air conditioning, and no longer is it okay to not have air conditioning. A lot of places with the temperatures on the rise, that's becoming a necessity, not an option.
Yeah, and we have in Tulsa, whenever we have such hot conditions, and I'm sure they have it there too, you have those cooling stations, which you got to have those across the city when you have temperatures like this. For some people who forget the fact that they have like if their power is going out, some of them, may be homeless and don't have a spot at all to receive any kind of AC. And so those cooling stations really important as well in situations like this, just to stay healthy. It'll hit you hard and it'll hit you fast, that heat. I visit out there quite often. I know I've talked about this before, but I have in-laws out there, and it is different. He described it as feeling like you're in an oven, and I think that was like spot on.
Yeah, and we're going to stay with heat as the theme. Our next podcast, we've got Zeke Housefather coming up next time. He's a climate scientist who's written a lot extensively for both Carbon Brief and Berkeley Earth there on the West Coast in California. We're going to be talking about the hot ocean waters. We've heard a lot about how hot the oceans have been this season. We're going to talk a little bit about what's causing that. It's not just the warming climate, but there are other things going on. He's really good at that. So looking forward to having on Zeke. And then we're going to do a couple more kind of ocean and safety kind of things, whether it's coastal safety or then returning to hurricanes before we get into. We're getting close to football season, right? So we're going to have somebody from the Corey Stringer Institute, Doug Casa there, to talk about heat and football practice, because you put those pads on, you run the wind sprints in the August heat, and that puts you at risk as well. So that we're going to close up shop for this week. So for Kirsten Lang in Tulsa, Matt Holiner in Chicago, and in absentia, our pal, Joe Martucci in Atlantic City, I'm meteorologist Sean Sublette. Thank you for listening to the Across the Sky podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Set summer in motion with the most electrifying Honda vehicles yet, like the CR-V and Accord, with available hybrid powertrains designed to deliver more thrilling performance and more innovative tech. Summer's here. Make every adventure more electrifying with Honda. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 3.9% APR on a 2023 Honda Accord Hybrid or 2023 CR-V Hybrid.
Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
See dealer for financing details.